Welcome to Actualol. Today I'm going to start the countdown of my top 50 board games of all time. I've played thousands of board games over the years and these are the absolute best. I'm currently running a pledge drive to save the future of the channel. Thank you to everyone who has signed up so far. After 1 week, we're 2/3 of the way to reaching the goal. If you like watching my videos and you'd be sad if I had to stop making them, please support the channel on Patreon. Right, let's get to the list. If I've featured the game before on the channel, I'll put a link to the video. Just click the I in the top right corner. At number 50 is Broom Service, and this game is just different from any other game in my collection. The theme is that you're picking up potions and then having to deliver them places, but ignore the theme, it's about these 10 roll cards that are in the game. Everyone has the same hand of cards, and they represent the actions that you can take. So every round, everyone picks 4 of those that they want to do that round secretly. And then one person's going to start and reveal one of those actions. When they do that, they have to decide, are they going to go brave or cowardly? If they go brave, they get way more from the action. It's way better, but it could be cancelled out. So if someone else then reveals that they're also doing that action this round, they can choose to go brave, and the first person won't get to take their action at all. They get nothing. Or they could go cowardly and it keeps going round, and ultimately the person who plays brave last, they are the only person who gets to be brave. Whereas everyone else that was cowardly, they get to take their action, they just get a lot less from it. And so it's this real push your luck thing of when do you choose to go brave, and you're trying to think about whether other people would have played certain cards, whether you can pick an action this round that other people aren't going to be involved in, because you can look at the board and see what they might want, see what potions they already have. It's really interactive, you're really thinking about what the other players are doing, and it's so exciting with those card reveals and the pushing your luck of going brave or not. It's one of those games where you're just, in my group, you're just swearing at each other all the time, and I just love games like that. It makes you really feel things. The only downside with this one is I just think the theme isn't really that interesting. I think they could have gone for something way more exciting. But the upside is that it plays like nothing else, and it's just so interactive and just has you interested in everything that's going on the entire game. That is Broom Service. At number 49 is Sons of Anarchy, Men of Mayhem. This is a rich thematic game where you're playing as a motorcycle gang. Of course, you're criminals, you're trying to buy and sell drugs, buy and sell guns, and ultimately make the most money. So there's different locations in the town, and you will go to a location, let's say the tattoo parlor, where you want to buy some drugs, and you'll try and take that action. So it's kind of like a worker placement thing. But a rival gang played by another player could come in and try and stop you, or maybe they want to do the action instead, so you get into a fight. And that's going to come down to how many gang members you have there, whether you use guns in the fight, and if you do, then their gang members are going to be going off to hospital. And then there's going to be a dice roll to see who wins and who gets to take that action. So you could maybe bribe them, say, look, don't come to this location, I'll give you some cash, you go somewhere else, and I'll make it worth your while. Or you could bribe them, say, look, we're going to have a fight, but please don't use guns because I don't want my gang members to go off to hospital because then it's harder for me to get them back. Of course, they could backstab you and say that they're going to do that, take your cash, and then change their mind. There's so many cool thematic touches to this game. And it's just one of those games where everything you do feels like you're a motorcycle gang. For example, if you take certain actions, you get the attraction of the police, which means it's harder for you to do business. So when you're in the black market phase, you can sell less drugs, and you've made it harder on yourself because your heat level is so high. Like I said, if your gang members get killed, they go to hospital, but somebody else can camp out of the hospital and maybe try and stop your gang members from getting out alive. It really puts you at each other's head. So the only downside with this is just, if you don't like a game where you have to be mean with each other, you have to be interactive, then don't play this game. It definitely will only be fun if you're willing to get involved, if you're willing to kind of go at people, to make those deals, to backstab them later on. There's temporary alliances. It really fits the theme. I love negotiation games, and this one has this extra cool stuff with the worker placement and the resources of guns and drugs, but ultimately it comes down to how best can you keep everyone happy and kind of get away with your criminal business. That is Sons of Anarchy, Men of Mayhem. At number 48 is Crosstalk. This is a party game where you play on teams and you're trying to get your team to guess the right clue. So there are 2 clue givers on either team. They know the same secret thing. So for example, they might be trying to get their teams to guess Raiders of the Lost Ark. And then they are going to give a secret clue to their team that the other team won't be able to see. So they write that on a whiteboard. It can be one word, and they give it to them. And that's going to give them something. So they might put adventurer or archaeology. And then what's going to happen is they're going to then give public clues that both the teams can hear. So if I give a public clue, let's say I say hat, I write it on the board, but then it's the other team's turn to guess. So my teammates have heard my clue, and hopefully they're hearing it in the context of that secret clue that I gave. So I can try and be really cagey and give something that the other team are going to have no idea about. So I give a really weird, specific secret clue at the start of the game that they can then use as a context for every public clue. And so it has some really intelligent thought in the game. So I give the public clue, they have a guess, then the other clue giver gives a clue, then my team have a guess. So every time you're trying not to give away too much with your public clue because you know that it's the other team that are then immediately going to guess. And so there's this real tension as the clue giver. You want to give so much, and so often in this game, for the first few rounds, both teams are just completely clueless because you're having to be really cagey. You're having to try and eke it out really slowly so that the other team doesn't get it. And then eventually it will just click. And as the guessers, it's so much fun trying to get it. It's one of the most challenging guessing games. It isn't obvious and it slowly reveals itself. It's almost like a crossword where you are thinking and thinking, you're trying to find that connection, and you might be at it for sort of 10 minutes, but then when it comes, it feels so good because you've really pieced everything together. And what happens is you've got this kind of magic eye puzzle of all these different words that don't seem to connect at all. And then finally you find that connection, you share it with your teammates. There's a really good cooperation on your team of kind of discussing the clues that you have. You have these whiteboards where you can communicate with each other so the other team don't know. And getting to that clue together and guessing, it's amazing. Of course, if you guess something, the other team can hear that and they're going to use that as information in their clues. So you don't want to necessarily give away too much with your guessing early on. And if you give away what that secret word is or something very close to that, then of course they've got just as much information as you do, and suddenly you're at a level playing field. There's so many interesting things going on, and yet with such a simple design, it's a really, really cool party game, Crosstalk. And I think it's got that same awesome challenge of something like Codenames. It's almost like on the first play or two, people can be a little struggle, not so much with the rules, but almost like how you play the game, because you're so inclined to just give great clues that then they just get it immediately, and that isn't quite the point. But once you play it a couple of times and you get, oh, if I give a good clue, the other team are going to win immediately, and that's when you start to get cagey, and that's when it gets really interesting. And I think it's a surprisingly thinky party game that I love. Crosstalk. At number 47 is Letters from Whitechapel. This is a classic hidden movement game where one player is playing as Jack the Ripper, who has to kill their 4 victims over 4 different nights and then escape back to their secret hideout. And the other players are playing cooperatively as detectives, trying to track his movement, find out where he is, and ultimately catch him before the end of the game. So Jack will pick a victim somewhere in the streets of Whitechapel, and then they'll be moving from that location to their secret hideout. So every turn they'll just write a number down on a bit of paper in secret, and then the detectives are trying to find out where he is moving. So they'll be searching for clues. They'll say, have you been at number 48? And if he's been there, they'll get a token onto the board, so they're tracking his path. And they're really trying to get into his head and think about, where might he go? Do you think he would go the easy way where none of the detectives are? Would he try and sneak through us, or is he double backing on himself? You really are trying to get into his head, and Jack the Ripper is just sweating the whole time. It's so tense because they always feel like they're just on the verge of being caught. And the detectives, often they feel lost, but what I love about this game is that the evidence builds, that you get more and more information about where he is on this night, but also about where his secret hideout might be. And so by the end of the 4th night, you hopefully know where it is, so you can cut off his path and really try and get him before he gets away. It's such a simple streamlined game. There's really hardly any mechanisms to get into. The only downside is that it's long. It can take a while, but it kind of needs that to build the arc of the story so that you get that information building as the detective, so that it really reaches this climax at the end of the fourth night. And I've played the game Whitehall, which is based on this, and I just felt it felt really formulaic. It felt like it played out the same every time, and Letters from Whitechapel just does not feel like that at all. The theme is dark. Some people are not going to like that, but I think it is the purest example of a hidden movement game that really comes down to that hide and seek and that really intense deduction. It's thinky and it's exciting. That's Letters from Whitechapel. Number 46 is K2, where you're trying to climb up the mountain K2. You have two meeples that represent your two climbers, and you're trying to get them as far up as possible, but without them dying. And that's the crucial thing of the game, is that you're constantly in fear that they will die, because as you get further up, the mountain gets colder and colder, and if you haven't spent time acclimatizing, then your characters will die. And so you can place tents on the mountain and camp out in those tents, and you can also play these acclimatization cards. So if those cards don't come into your hand when you need them, then there's that real threat that they could die. And so you're trying to be as daring as possible. You want to get up the mountain before other people get in your way, because players can really block each other as the paths narrow at the top of the mountain. But at the same time, you're trying to track the weather. So there's a weather forecast. You can see what the weather's going to be for the next few rounds, and also what it will be for different altitudes. So you can sort of look ahead and be like, that's when I need to be at the peak in the next few rounds, and then I'll come back down and protect myself. Because you can get to the peak and get the points, but then lose all those points if that character dies before the end of the game. It's got such a cool thematic flavor to it. Feels like no other game, and it has this race vibe, very simple card playing of deciding when to move and how to move, but I love that it has that extra jeopardy. Your characters could die. They often will die. I've never played a game where at least one character hasn't died, and that makes it exciting. It makes it different to other games, and it makes it thematic. That's K2. And number 45 is Paperback. This is a deck building word game where you each have a deck of starting letter cards. You draw up 5, then you have to create a word with them. That's going to give you a certain number of points that you can then buy better letter cards. They go into your deck, so when they come back round, you're going to put them in a word, get even more points, buy better letters, and just like in any deck building game, you're buying stronger cards, you're getting even more powerful, and then ultimately trying to get points with them. It works really nicely because you're trying to create the longest word ultimately. If you can get all your letters in, you're going to get more points from it, and that's going to mean that you can get better cards. And each of those cards has powers, so you'll be able to draw extra letters from your deck or turn some letters wild, get a double word score. But generally those more powerful powers are on the cards with tricky letters. So if you've got a double word score on a Q, every time it comes out, you'll be like, yes! And then you realize that you don't have the letters to actually be able to make a good word with it. And that's really frustrating. So there's a planning in terms of the letters that you pick. Can you really afford to have 3 C's in your deck? Because if they all come out at once, you're going to be able to create a word with them. And then in terms of how the powers play off of each other, I love that it just still comes down to that Scrabble skill of creating good words. That I like word games, so that's the main reason I like Paperback, but it also adds this extra gaming element, and you don't have to be the best wordsmith. You can still win the game because you played the powers the right way. The only downside with this one is it's not very interactive, but what I like is that you can think about your word whilst it's other players' turn. So you're not really involved with the other players, but you are really engrossed in that puzzle of trying to come up with a really good word. And you always feel like there's a better word out there that will use all your letters, you just haven't found it yet. Really like this one. That's Paperback. And number 44 is Risk Legacy. So imagine the war game Risk, where you got your troops on a map and you're attacking another player's country and you're rolling dice and seeing who wins. Well, but every time you play the game, something about it changes, that you have an impact on that map. you get to place stickers on the board that change regions. So you might put a defensive zone so that if you're in that zone, it's easier to defend in that region, or you might make it easier to attack a certain region. You'll get to create your own cities and name them based on successes that you've had. And if you win a particular game, you get to write your name on the board. It's amazing that you play this campaign, 15 games, and it's different from any other campaign that's ever been played of Risk Legacy because of what you and your friends did. It's still a really simple game at its heart. It's still quite luck driven, but it creates a story. It gives you a kind of purpose for playing Risk. And it also makes it a better game than original Risk. You have objectives that you're trying to go for. So it's not a game that lasts forever. You're trying to conquer other players' HQs. And if you do that, you get stars, and the first person to 4 stars wins that game. But as the campaign progresses, they'll bring in new missions, new ways to get stars, and new things will change. So they're introducing a more complex, interesting game as it goes on. So it's not this huge barrier to entry, and it just means that there's a real arc to what you're doing. Inside the box, there are loads of packs that you get to open when certain events happen. So if somebody uses 3 missiles in an attack, there's this big box that you get to open, and that's going to introduce a whole new element to the game. So you're waiting for it to happen, or sometimes you can force it to happen because you really want to see what gets revealed. Risk is a game that I'll never play ever again. It's far too long and it's got too much luck. Risk Legacy has some of that luck, but yeah, I don't mind because I'm telling this story that I'm a part of that no one else has ever told that story with this game. And what I like about it is that even though it's such an aggressive game, it's a war game, you're building this thing together. There's this collaborative aspect to this, that you're writing on that board, you're creating the countries, and by the end of it, you'll have this thing that you remember everything that happened with your friends, even that you are at each other's throat the whole time, but it kind of brought you together in a way that a one and done war game never does. Such an interesting experience, and done in a surprisingly simple way. That's Risk Legacy. And number 43 is Arboretum. This is one of the best card games out there. And it's super simple. On your turn, you draw 2 cards, you play a card into your Arboretum, you discard another card. So you're trying to collect sets of trees. They run from 1 to 8, and in your Arboretum, you want these paths of trees that also run in ascending order from 1 to 8. Ideally of the same set, because you'll get bonuses like that, but also if you can create a path that goes through multiple sets, then you can score off of all of those different types of trees. But you're only going to score a tree if you have the highest card of that type in your hand at the end of the game. So there's this really interesting balance of trying to play trees out to score points for them, but make sure that you're going to have a card in your hand that beats the other players to be able to actually get any of those points that you've built up over the game. If somebody else gets that 7 that you were waiting for the whole time, and you've only got a 6 at the end of the game, then you're not going to score those trees. And all of that effort you put into maybe putting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down in that Arboretum counts for nothing. It's fascinating and so thinky. It's so frustrating that you've got this tiny hand and you want all the different types of trees, because you don't only want yours to be able to score yours, but you're also worrying about the other players. You can see that they're going to get so many points off of that type of tree. So of course you want to collect the cards into your hand to stop them from being able to score that. So there's this really important thing of having to keep an eye on the other players, what they're working towards, and whether you can stop them or whether they're trying to stop you. I don't think there's another card game out there that packs this much thinkiness and frustration into such a simple, approachable idea. Plus it's got really nice artwork. That's Arboretum. And number 42 is Clank. You play as adventurers going into a dungeon to try and steal the most treasure, but get out in time before the dragon kills you. So there's this interesting push your luck thing to it where the deeper you go, the better the treasure is. And the longer you stay in the dungeon, the more treasure you're going to get. But the longer you stay in the dungeon, the more noise you're going to make, or clank. Every time you make noise, you put cubes into a bag. And when the dragon attacks, the dragon pulls out cubes from the bag. And if they get your color, and of course they probably will if you've made a lot of noise, then you take wounds. And if you take loads of wounds, you die. If you die in the bottom of the dungeon, you're out. That's it. You've just pushed your luck way too far. You have to try and make sure you don't stay too in the depths for too long. And of course, you can just rush out. And if you rush out, you speed up the dragon attacks for the other players. So there's really cool balance of how far do you want to push your luck? How many points do you want to try and get? And this is all done with a deck building system where you really need certain cards to come up. You cannot move if you don't get the cards that you need. And so you're building up your deck, you're adding special powers and things that are going to make you better at getting points. But if you don't get the cards you need because you built your deck up with too many other types of cards, then that can be incredibly frustrating, but also just really exciting when you're hoping to get the ones that you do need. Clank is my favorite deck building game because of that push your luck and the excitement of the dragon attacking and pulling out those cubes and seeing whether you're going to die. And number 41 is When I Dream. This is a party game where each round one player is wearing a blindfold, they're the dreamer, and they're trying to guess certain words that the other players are giving them clues towards. The twist is that the other players have hidden roles. If they're a fairy, that means that they are trying to get them to guess the word correctly, so they are just giving good clues. But if they're a boogeyman, they don't want them to get it right, so they are giving bad clues, trying to throw the dreamer off. And if they're the Sandman, they're trying to create an equal balance between correct and incorrect guesses. So at the end of the round, they want there to be an equal balance between right and wrong. And so sometimes they're trying to give good clues, and sometimes they're trying to give bad clues. So the dreamer is blindfolded and they have no idea who is who, and they're listening to these clues and they're trying to create some sense out of it. So if the word was shark and someone said fish and someone said fin and then someone says jam, it just throws them. Now they probably then gonna recognize that voice and remember them as a boogeyman and think, okay, they tried to throw them off. But if that person actually was a bit more subtle with it, they said scallop or something, then the dreamer might guess something that's wrong, but they've been thrown off just enough. And that is where the excitement of the game is really, in trying to be a boogeyman and throw them off in a way that you don't get detected as being a bad person, that they will then trust you in a future round and just say something that's close to what everyone else is saying, but in a way that means that they'll guess incorrectly. The Sandman is trying to balance it out and work out when to give good clues and when to give bad clues. And the dreamer is just totally lost. And at the end of the round, they actually will get an extra point if they can remember all the words that they were clued. And after a minute, that can just be impossible. It's a completely different party game. That blindfold surprisingly just adds something and makes it that bit more exciting. It really kind of throws off the memory of the dreamer. And it creates a challenge that just has you in laughter, because the things that people say that you're having to think on the spot against a timer. If you delay too long with your clue, then it's clear that you're the boogeyman. So you'll throw out something quickly that is bad, but actually might end up helping them. This one's great for big groups. It can be a little bit hard to get some people to understand how the roles work and what their goal is. So you might not get up to speed until like the third game, but when you do get there, the challenge that it presents and the fun that it brings is just like nothing else. When I Dream. Those were my 50 to 41st favorite board games of all time. If you'd like to buy any of them, there are links in the description. And if you enjoy watching my videos and you'd be sad if I stopped making them, please support the channel on Patreon so I don't have to. There's a link below. Just like Alexander Drescher does. Thank you, Alexander. I'm Jon Purkis. Thanks for watching.